Huh?
You know, I've said this before, but gaming is still pretty young in comparison to its other media contemporaries. It's like half as young as movies, and I still feel as though we haven't really touched the cusp of what games can do. The amount of stories, the amount of possibilities, the gameplay, and of course, the worlds that the players are introduced to. Now, whether or not those worlds are actually worth the $60 price tag, well, that's gonna be a personal problem if you ask me. Because if you look at the mountain of AAA games that have come out in the world, one of the biggest selling points is how a game looks. Those graphics and how much time is being used to sell you on the packaging of the game. And that's because graphics are an easy sell. Hell, if you look at games that are ported over to a stronger console or PC, it's great. Some games a lot of people couldn't play from older titles can come back with better graphics. Things like frames per second, draw distancing, resolution, textures, and all that other junk that people go gaga are definitely important. But as of late, in the last few years, I've noticed a small trend, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed it. So I'd like to start off this video with a single question. Are graphics becoming the most important thing in gaming now? I know, it seems like a really easy question to answer, but hear me out for like about 10-15 minutes. You gotta remember that when gaming first started, we were with this, then this, immediately to this, and then followed up with this, and more recently, this. Now, there's actually a few really good reasons for why game companies are willing to shell out millions of dollars to make the pixels on the screen look good, but at times will have the story be rather on the thin side, or the gameplay will be...
Please, accept my apologies for the confusion.
garbage. The first is rather a basic idea. Sight. I mean, for a majority of the population, it's our primary sense and one that we rely on more than others. Hell, I'm looking at my script right now, so in order to quickly garner attention, you need to be able to hit that sense immediately. So let's face it, despite the fact that we complain about previews that are just cinematics and hardly any gameplay, and Clinton kids appearing on the stages, it's a lot more appealing than just listing out the features of a game, cause it's boring. It's so boring. Graphics tend to be a lot easier for use for marketing purposes since they're easily transferable between mediums. You got screenshots, trailers, magazines, and TV ads. Then again, the last game I recall that was showcased on a TV ad was The Last of Us 2. Ugh. As I showed not too long ago, graphical improvements are easy to showcase and give hard numbers for. Highly praised zombie survival shooter has characters that are 25k polys per character and runs at 30 FPS, but wait! The fourth remastering of the same game has more realistic designs for the characters and runs at 60 FPS, but has none of the multiplayer features! Oh my word! What the fuck was that? And unlike game design, the writing, the character development, or how the AI works, graphics are the easiest thing to sell to people, because you need some level of brain to figure out how level design works. You need time to learn about the characters and the writing and the gameplay, but graphics? Pfft. Just look at the pretty picture that drone number 69 on Twitter put trying to explain to me why these uglier character designs look better than the originals. Graphics are often touted as a major selling point for games for years, and at times were prioritized over other factors. Even back in the console days, like say with these games, the PS1, 2, and 3, graphics were a quick and easy shot to push how powerful the next generation was and push gamers into dropping mad cash for glorified pieces of plastic. Now don't get me wrong, I love me some plastic, and with some competition to get hashtag gamers to get them to play our games, and prices going up and the economy breathing down your back, you're gonna need to sell the appeal of your game really quick. But here's the rub. Yes, graphics are important. I wouldn't play Grey Blob Simulator unless it was the ultra deluxe version with added fan service feature to it. Graphics aren't the be-all, end-all. They are essentially the packaging to a game's gameplay, story, some other third thing. So when you have a game that's pretty but plays terribly or has a horrible bare-bones story, graphics don't really mean that whole lot, at least to me. 8 years ago, one of the most common examples of this was The Order 1886, a game that focuses entirely on cinematics and flash. Yet, most of the game has the player spend their time engaging with the terrible action gameplay that has the player go through a slog. Which, it's a game where you're fighting werewolves. How do you screw up an awesome concept like that? But I think a better example nowadays is... Now, before you start typing your comments, hear me out. Last of Us 2 is a very realistic and very graphically well done game. It certainly has a lot of time and effort put into its visuals, from clothing being realistically done, small details, and adding a ton of gameplay options for various people to play the game, regardless of any disabilities they may have. That being said, the gameplay itself is bare bones. Like, the only real addition is a jump button, and there's a lack of thought put into other aspects of the game. One such example is the inability to knock people out or moving and hiding people's bodies. A mechanic in gaming that was done years ago on Metal Gear Solid 3 and had a lot more mechanics that could have easily been translated into Last of Us 2. And the story...
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Look, you can flash all those high scores and awards at me all you want, but those don't really matter when you consider that the game was given those by journalistic outlets that seem to tickle the fancy of journalists who want to look progressive. The fact is, the story is hit or miss. You need only look at YouTube to see a plethora of differing opinions, each of them somehow condescending for some reason. And opinions that are just, well, dumb.
Originally complained about the game's pacing and story choices, though it became clear that its most vocal critics on social media were more frustrated by it focusing on a gay woman who wasn't attractive by anime waifu standards, while also mad that it dared to question the morality of the original game's male lead.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Point is, the story really did a number on the fanbase, and whether or not you like it is beside the point. Cause here's the thing, graphically it looks great, but there's a lot of drab in the world. I get it. End of the world, it's the point, doesn't mean I have to like it. Artists, animators, and developers, to me, spend so much time on the visuals of the game that they often take 5 times as long to produce what they're used to. And for what? Eventually the games are gonna age, sooner than you may think. Especially when a game that doesn't have any actual style or artistic design other than gritty. Cause at that point, you're just another one on the pile. Like I said, graphics are only packaging for the game. There needs to be more substance to it. Otherwise, you just gave me a pretty looking box and inside was...
Oh my goodness!
Now, a common argument for this is that you need realistic graphics for immersion. And don't get me wrong, if you need that, immersion is a subjective standard for people. And if you do, fine by me. That being said, realism isn't a necessity to get immersed into a game or world. Hell, look only towards a game like Legends Arceus. Clearly, it's not a game that has the best graphics or even the greatest style to it, but the gameplay was enough to drown out the people who got insanely loud during the Pokemon tree debacle. I'd also argue that while the game graphically isn't all that great, the world is a fair bit more memorable, mainly due to the use of colors in it. I didn't need to believe the world was real to get immersed into the game. The gameplay was enough to get me entangled into it. It alone was able to do that and keep me engrossed at the game for months. A lot of people will equate realism with immersion, but they aren't the same thing. Just because something has a lot more work put into it to be much more realistic, that doesn't mean it's more pleasing to look at. I mean, just look at all the live adaptations from our animations. There's a serious lack of charm and something obviously missing from the final product. What made live action adaptations so devoid of the pizzazz of the original, and note, I'm only talking about visuals, even the ones that have a lot more out there effects to them suffer from this too. Like, take this for example.
東方丈介、お前はこの西村奥安のザ・ハンドが消す。西村奥安のザ・ハンドが消す。Oh brother, this guy stinks!
Realism, quote-unquote, is used as a means to make things darker and grittier, and frankly I'm starting to hate that. I already have to come to terms that our world is pretty washed out and gray and it's depressing. If you look towards games from the generations of N64, PlayStation 1 and 2 eras, yes, graphics themselves are a lot more jagged, there aren't as many polygons, but you know what these games have to them? They have life, they have charm, they have style. Now you may say, I'm an old coot at this point, and you wouldn't be wrong, I am old at this point. These games, while not realistic, they didn't have much complexity, but they don't have to be for them to be real for us the players. They're not dull, they aren't washed out, they stand out from the norm and make them all the more memorable due to how less detail there is to them. Do not get me wrong, I'm not making a case that simplicity is the best. Well, Technically I am, but whatever. However, as we're humans, we tend to focus on the details that really matter to us. Smaller details, while impressive, don't really mean all that much to me, especially if there's nothing to the smaller details than just to make the world seem more real. In my humble opinion, strong, beautiful art direction beats out graphics and realism every time in terms of importance, at least with gaming. One look at, say, Persona 5, you wouldn't say the game itself is the peak of graphical realism, but it sure has a lot of style to it. And as much as I have issues with Nintendo's policies, they figured out that gameplay is a first and foremost for a game.
If it's not fun, why bother?
And I know there's going to be that one guy in the comments who's going to go, Pokemon chill! But there's a reason why people actually liked Pokemon Scarlet and Violet despite all the glitches and issues with them. It's because the core gameplay and story actually managed to mean something to players. This isn't me saying that glitches are acceptable. They shouldn't be, and I've already stated my issues with those games. Please, stop imposing on me. But there are plenty of games from the AAA crowd that are realistic and have an art style that makes the games more interesting. Metal Gear Rising, a game that I've talked about multiple times last year, has an art design that is obviously more grounded in the real world. I said art design, not general concepts. There's a lot of brown, dull colors and locations that honestly aren't that memorable, but the game makes up for it with its action set pieces, amazing music, and honestly batshit insanity that's throughout the entire game. Even then, Metal Gear Rising isn't a bad looking game at all. Metal Gear Rising came out almost 10 years ago at this point. Feeling old now, huh? Are ya? Welcome to my world! Say hi to the Grim Reaper for me! Now, it isn't just realistic art styles that fall into this as well. I remember last year that I talked about Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, a game who's got a very amazing world design with all the colorful neon lights and the 80s rock aesthetics. I like it. However, if you know anything about this game, you would be well aware that it too suffered a lot of glitches. My point is that graphics aren't the be-all and end-all. I know that's a real duh statement, especially when you look towards indie games and the major games that break this mold, each with their own unique style and such. So don't get me wrong, this isn't me going, good graphics bad! There's a reason why I use the can ruin in the title of this video. You can see it right down there, see? I do think that making a game look good is important and needs to have its own identity, and having an art style, to me, is more important than having amazing graphics. The last thing I want to do is go back to the days of simple Pong, and I don't want every game to be like a Persona 5 with style oozing from it, because that can basically break someone in two if they do that. For as many issues as I have with the Life is Strange series, they do have a pretty good artistic design for their games. I love how they use nostalgia and they use that in their art design. It's amazing, and I kind of wish I could talk about it more, but I'm pretty sure Life is Strange, his fan base would want to string me up if I ever made another video dedicated to it. Still don't like Chloe, though. And as I said in the last few minutes, I do not think graphics should be ignored, but to me, I've never really considered graphics to be the first and foremost to what a game means to me. I find that artistic design is much better. Games like Okami, Metal Gear Rising, Batman Arkham City, and they all each have different art directions, and they're games that I still love and play to this day. But when it comes to games that lack in the gameplay or the story department, that's what makes it feel more hollow to me. Even more so if they're racked with bugs. I think at the end of the day that having very detailed and realistic worlds in video games are important, but they shouldn't be the only thing that is important. Hell, if I can take something from Nightmare of Decay, a game that takes quite a few pages from Resident Evil from the PS1, I think that says something about how games can work without having the greatest graphics. Of course, what do I know? I'm just a regular dude on the internet who just talks about video games, and as such, I open the door to you guys. Do you think I'm just going crazy? Or is this old coot saying something that, you know, isn't gibberish? Let me know down below what your thoughts are. I'm MangaKamen, thanks for your time and have a great day. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up. And if you're so interested, you can join me on Patreon. If you like the videos, hey, I could always go for another $1. Helps me get more coffee and helps me pay for my editors. Until next time, have a nice day.